Muppet Christmas Carol, then Nigel worked on those. He also starred with Tom Baker in a Fourth Doctor story. And with him he has brought one of the greatest showbiz icons of 1970s TV, Hartley Hare. So without further ado, please welcome Nigel Plaskett and Hartley Hare. Hey Nigel.
Hello, thank you, Andy.
She's very well behaved as well, Hartley, I can see.
Yeah.
Right, so, I mentioned the Muppets there, and I mentioned Labyrinth, so that's working with the great Jim Henson, isn't it? So how did that relationship happen? Because you worked on a lot of Henson projects, didn't you?
Yeah, well, when we were doing Pipkins at ATV at Elstree in the 70s, Jim moved in next door on the next stage to make the Muppet Show. So I got to know the Muppets then, while we were making Pipkins. And about 10 years later, he was doing the film Labyrinth. And he was looking for lots of people to work on it. So I was lucky enough to get in on it and do the film, most of it. I was doing Splitting Image at the same time, so I had to share time between the two. But I did do Dance the Magic Dance on Labyrinth, and a lot of the war stuff at the end, the battle scenes. And the very final shot where there's lots of characters all around the bed, I was working as I did in my suit, sitting on the bed. Yeah.
That must have been quite an amazing thing to choreograph. There was a lot of you. We have not bumped into each other. Were you actually all managing to?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it was difficult, but it was all done. It took us a week to shoot the scene, the whole song. So we were doing it for a week before it was finished, and it was done in very small bits, of course, you know. And when he threw the baby in the air, it wasn't a real baby.
Wow.
It was a dummy.
Yes, I'm glad you cleared that up. So, as a puppeteer, many people might think it's putting your hand in a puppet and doing a voice, but there's a lot more to it than that, isn't it? Because these puppets have got personalities and characteristics. I mean, how do you come up with a character?
Well, with a show like Pipkins, I was given the brief outline of what they wanted. Now I had to go away and come up with a voice and a character. And because we were doing it over 9 years, the character develops quite a lot over that period. And also, the writers come in and they watch what you're doing. They watch what you're doing between the takes when you're playing around. And that affects the way they write the show. So it's a really good thing to be able to do a show for a long time, because it develops the character, and you can develop the character, which is exactly what happened with Hartley, for me. So.
I think I remember seeing an interview with somebody who was working on The Dark Crystal at the same time as we were working on the Muppet film, and he was talking about the difference between what he called the Muppet bop, the way a Muppet would move, and the way something more realistic like a Skeksis would move. So does that influence you at all as well? Do you know?
Yes.
The movements?
Well, yeah. You different techniques for different things. I work on a show called Avenue Q, which is a musical, and I train the actors to use the puppets for that, because it's a kind of parody of Sesame Street, and they work in the same style as the Hensons do, which is something I've learned over the years. I've worked with the Hensons from Labyrinth in 1985, right the way through to 2016 when we did that puppet game show, which was a Saturday night show. So I've worked with the Hensons a lot, and I've learned their style, and I know how to do that. I can apply that in a training session quite easily. And it's very different from something like Hartley, who would walk with the character walk, as you say, and you find the character.
What came first for you? Was it acting or puppeteer work, and how did you fall into puppeteering?
Well, I set out to be an actor, and just at the same time as I started doing Pipkins, I did a commercial for Vic Sinex called, where I was a character called Malcolm, and I was supposed to be taking my exams, and it showed every Christmas, every winter season for about 10 years. So I got very kind of well known for doing that, and I think it got wanting to be famous out of my system, because it's very intrusive on your life. So I decided at that point that I wouldn't pursue the acting, and there was a lot of this puppet work around, so I went with that. And that's when I started. With Pipkins finished, there was a short gap when I did a series with George Cole, and then I went into Hitchhiker. Oh, you're well.
Yes.
Yeah, I produced that with him. That was a series of stories written by Elizabeth Lindsay, who was playing Topov in Pipkins. And she and I got together when it finished and looked to do this. We did it with Yorkshire TV. And then Spinning Image came along and I did that.
Well, there was an acting role though, because I've seen your picture, and I've mentioned this before today already, but you did pop up in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
And it was in a great, era of Doctor Who. You were with Tom Baker,
Yeah.
who was a bit of a legend, I'm led to believe. Again, I mentioned Frankie Howard to Colin earlier. I've heard stories that Tom's either the loveliest man to work with or can be a bit of a diva if he's not in the mood. So, what version did you work with?
Well, he was in relatively good spirits when we did it, and it was fine. He did make an entrance on the first day of rehearsals, throwing the script across the room, saying, "Who wrote this horse?" And I won't go on because there were children present. And he threw the script across the room. But then I learned afterwards he did that on almost every occasion, everything he did. Anyway, but there is a story that I could tell you about Tom, and that is Paul Seed, who was playing the villain in this series I did. He had brought a little dog to work with him every day, and he would leave the dog in the car, in the shade, so it wasn't affected. But at lunchtime we went to the pub for lunch, and he brought the dog with him, and Tom came and joined us for lunch, and when he saw the dog, he said to the dog, "Hello," and Paul said, "Look, Tom, don't say hello, he doesn't like it. Anything else you can say to him, don't say hello." Tom, "Hello," and he got a bit closer. And Paul said again, "Tom, don't do that, he won't like it," because the dog growled every time he said hello. And on the third hello, the dog jumped up and bit a chunk out of his lip. So he had this chunk out of his lip here.
Yeah, that's on screen as well.
It is.
Isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, wow.
Because this was in the middle of recording the show. So we'd already shot a lot of the scenes. We were in the middle rehearsal period. As you were talking earlier, we did get a rehearsal period. We had 2 weeks. And we still had to then shoot others. So in the series, if you watch it, it comes and goes, because we'd already recorded some of the later scenes in the earlier section. So he does lose it. And they tried to cover it up with makeup, but it just got infected. Yeah, it did. It was rather
It must be
unpleasant.
accident-proof.
Yeah.
Now, Pipkins.
Yes.
Now,
Want to talk to him?
yeah, we'll talk to Hartley. I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit about how Pipkins came out. Hello, Hartley.
Hello.
Oh, it's an honour to meet you.
Oh, yes, it is, isn't it?
You're exactly as I expected you to be.
And,
You're one of the legends of 70s TV.
Oh, yes, I am. I'm sure I am, yes.
And I was about to ask Nigel, I'm sure you could join in here, but Pipkins was, it was one of the first times that ITV had wanted to do funded children's programmes, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
And
yes,
this was going to be was this going to be a British Sesame Street? I read was one of the...
It was inspired by Sesame Street. The IBA had seen Sesame Street and they were very excited by it, and they wanted to put on something similar for children. So they commissioned 4 programs. One was Rainbow, one was Hickory House, and there was Mr. Trimble, and Pipkins was the 4th. And we all had 1 day a week, except for Rainbow, which got 2 for some reason. it was to do with them not having the weekend.
All right. Okay. Now, so it was set in a puppet shop.
Yes.
Of which were you managing director? Am I right? Think about something like
Well,
that?
I like to think I was.
You had an office, didn't you?
I did, yes,
Yeah.
I had a phone.
And you had a phone. I know you had a very special technique for answering the phone because you've not got thumbs, have you?
I've got these things at the end of my arm.
Yeah. So how did you answer the phone for people who might wonder?
Very politely.
Ha
Never. Yes. Sorry, I don't know your name.
That's Andy.
Andy, oh, I've forgotten it already.
Well, that's me, very memorable. We can't all be as memorable as you, Hartley.
No, that's true.
And I hope you don't mind me being rude, Hartley, but you do look in very good condition these days. Have you had work done?
I've had work, yes.
Oh, well,
I'm afraid so. I've had the odd stitch here and there.
Why not, though?
Yeah, why not? Indeed.
No, and nowadays with HD TV, if you were to back on the screen, then obviously you don't want to look your best. You don't want anything.
Oh, I do. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I'm very expensive, you know. This costs a fortune, this stuff.
Wow.
Apparently.
I'm honoured to be near such a lavish, expensive hair.
Yes, yes, you are.
One of the things I did like on Pipkins, Hartley, was when you went out and about.
Oh,
You
yes.
went on buses and trees and all sorts, didn't you?
Yes, we did. We seem to live somewhere north of London called Elstree. And I was at the bus in Edgware, which was very local. We didn't have money to go far.
Budgets were low. We did go out and about. We made it to Southend one day, which was about as far as we could go. But that was the beach. But the premise of the series was also one of the reasons for the series happening was for children who lived in tower blocks and they never got out to experience things outside in the world, you know. And at that point, it did.
I think one of the other things that's worth noting, I mean, if anyone knows about the history of Pipkins, it was one of the first children's TV shows that actually dealt with the subject of death, wasn't it?
It was, yeah.
Which is groundbreaking, really, wasn't it, at the time? It was an amazing decision.
It was the first programme. It was about 9 years before it happened on Sesame Street when they did it. But yes, George Woodbridge, who was the actor playing Inigo Pipkin, which was the original title of the series, he died about a third of the way into the second series. And whilst we carried on shooting that series and saying he had gone fishing, it was decided between the two series to tackle it head on and say what had happened. And it got a lot of positive response, apparently. You didn't see it, but, you know, it got a lot of positive response. And I think it was a very interesting thing. In fact, it was so good, we did it again about 2 years later with a pet.
Ah. And the other thing that was, I mean, quite big, I guess, at the time, was a lot of the characters in Pipkins had regional accents.
That was unusual.
Yeah.
Because it didn't happen anywhere else on any of the other shows, as far as I know.
So, Pig was a Brummie.
Big was a Brummie, Topov was a Cockney, Hartley was Hartley, and who else? There was Octavia, she was French.
Yes.
And Mooney, the Badger, he was Irish.
Right.
And then there was Angus McHare, who was obviously Scottish. And so, yeah, quite a few different regions. Yeah.
The other thing that I do remember as well, which was quite a bizarre thing to see, Hartley had his own puppet.
Yes. That's one of the episodes that survives.
Yes.
It's a puppet operating a puppet.
Now, this episode survives is an interesting thing because a lot of people think that maybe it's very old programs that are missing from the archive, but even fairly recently, 70s to early 80s, to have missing programs is bizarre.
Well, there was no secondary market at the time for the stuff, and what they used to do is wipe the tapes and use them again. So that's kind of why I love it.
Luckily, it's partly down to you, isn't it, that they exist now on DVD.
Yeah. Well, I was a bit of a technology geek, and I was very early with the video recorders, and so I started recording the programs then, just for my own use. I didn't ever give a thought that they would end up on a DVD or anything in the shops.
So I know that at one point in the fairly recent past that you had thought about trying to bring Pipkins back, but that resulted in a totally new show, didn't it? Which is also a very unique project, and I think some other people, that's something else people might not know that you're associated with, but what was it?
Well, yeah, we tried to bring Pipkins back, but we started talking to ITV about it, and they couldn't be sure of who owned the rights any longer, because it had been 30 years since it was made, and the company had been sold several times over that period, so they weren't sure who owned it. So when we decided, myself and two of the writers for Pipkins, we decided we would do something of our own. It was completely different, but was very much the same. It had similar characters in it, and it was very similar, but it wasn't the same. So, and that ended up on the BBC, on the iPlayer.
Yeah.
That was called Monty and Co.
Monty and Co, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, was there only ever one series of Monty and Co? Did you decide that did you not want to carry on the project?
No. It's the BBC. They ran out of money, so they couldn't afford to do it. And also the commissioning editors changed, and usually when you get a new commissioning editor, they don't want to recommission stuff that the last person has done.
Right, okay.
So sadly, we didn't get the opportunity to do it, but we're still looking.
Okay, and I'm aware now as well that Hartley, you can record personal videos, so you've got a little business, hasn't he? There?
He has, yes.
Yeah.
I don't know how he does it, but he has, yes.
Oh, wow.
He will make a personal video for you if you, there's a card on the table where I'm sitting. He can do, say, happy birthday to you or whatever. He's very, as long as it's clean.
It's also worth mentioning as well that the other place people might know you from is you work with Monkey on the PG Tips adverts.
Yeah.
Have you always worked with Monkey for his different?
Yeah, for 25 years now.
25 years.
Yeah, and in fact, PG Tips have just started using him again on the advertising campaign. There was a break for about 6 years.
Yeah. Am I right in thinking he's now married to Emily Ayrton?
He is married to
Emily.
Emily.
That's a strange turn of events in itself, isn't it?
It is. We never see the children.
No, but are they referred to?
They are referred
Oh, right, gosh.
Yes.
So, Nigel, you've got Pipkins DVDs with you today, and you've got photographs as well.
Yeah.
And can people come and have a selfie with Hartley?
Yeah.
Which I am building up to. Very nervous, but I've met him now, so I feel better.
You can.
I'm very pleased about that. And I am really happy that you came today and that you brought Hartley. It's a real honour to meet you.
Thank you for asking.
You have been in some films and things that lots of people love, so thank you so much for coming. And ladies and gentlemen, can you give a big round of applause to Nigel Plaskett, please? And Hartley.
Thank you very much. Yes, don't forget me.
That's it.